Retro.
Hi, this is Fred Tatasciore, and you're listening to Dennis and Jay on Podcast Stardust. The Force is strong with both of them.
Welcome to Podcast Stardust. This is the fully armed and operational podcast dedicated to Star Wars news, reviews, and discussion. I'm Dennis Keithley.
And I'm Jay Krebs.
And we're kicking off another week of Star Wars discussion with the next episode in our The Clone Wars rewatch. Before we start with that, Jay, you want to go ahead and remind everybody where we can be found on Instagram and Facebook?
Of course. We are on Facebook and Instagram at Podcast Stardust.
All right. The dish is aligned, the signal is boosted to maximum output, the shield is down, and we are now broadcasting to the galaxy. So we have concluded our discussion of Season 2. If I was diligent, then I remembered to rebroadcast our discussion of the last episode of that season, which we'd previously covered as part of our Hondo Anaka series, but we just aren't going back to recover those episodes. And so now we are kicking off Season 3, which is called Clone Cadets. This is a fun episode. Jay, you want to go ahead and give us the summary, please?
Yes. On Kamino, Domino Squad nears their graduation from training and promotion to the ranks of clone troopers. However, their inability to work as a coherent team prevents them from passing their final test. When they are on the verge of washing out, discussions by members of the squad with Clone 99, Jedi General Shaak Ti, and mercenary trainer Brick inspire the squad to work together. Given a final chance to pass their test, they overcome their previous difficulties and rise to the challenge.
All right. So, by the way, good job on saying Kamino Domino. When I wrote this and I was reading it, I kept saying Kamino Domino. So it was hard to get that out since they're spelled so similarly right
They
next to each other,
are.
but pronounced differently. But anyway, what are your overall thoughts on this one?
Oh my gosh, I love this episode so much. And it's such a strong opening to season 3, obviously, but it's also a callback to the origins of Domino Squad because we got to see them, in season 1 in the episode Rookies. So this is kind of a prequel.
Yeah.
But it's also a great moment that foreshadows many of the conflicts that they will later face. And it's about sacrifice and brotherhood, identity, the whole idea of being good enough or being expendable. And you know me, I love me some clones, and this is it's so great. I just puts us back at the beginning, and it's got a lot of questions to look at too. But what do you think?
No, I like it quite a bit. It's an episode that grew on me the more I watched it, because on my first watch through the Clone Wars, I was more interested in moving ahead and seeing the battles between the Republic and the Separatists, seeing the Jedi in action, seeing the clones in the field. And so to take a step back at the time, I was like, this is not what I want. But especially when you're like, look, you got a brand new episode in a brand new season, right? You want to see what Anakin and Obi-Wan and Ahsoka are up to in that regard.
Sure.
So at the time, this didn't land with me nearly as well. But now that we can go back and binge these things, it's easier to appreciate this. And it's not that it ever was a bad episode. It's just that I don't need it to fulfill a particular itch when it comes to Star Wars, because I can get that whenever I want. And so I can appreciate this for what it is. One of the things that Dave Filoni talks about in the featurette is how there was a big fan response to the Rookies episode from season 1 when when this same squad, held off the Separatists as they were trying to get past the listening outpost and invade Kamino there. And so they basically went back and, as Clone Wars frequently does, told us the story out of order on that, which is fine. But one of the other things that occurred to me, Jay, is that I was kind of reminded of some of the stories that Karen Traviss told with
Yes.
the training of the clones here. But
Mhm.
I really like the way they updated that idea here compared to what she did. But what did you think about that?
And I put that in my personal notes here to bring up as well, as far as how different it could have been if someone like Cal Scarata would have trained or at least stepped in to help train these clones, and how different it would have been between the way that, these bounty hunters and Shakti were training them, because Cal's focus was so different on Mandalorian culture and family, and those types of things. And the way that null clones were looked at as
Mhm.
opposed to quote unquote defective clones like 99, and what is we get the first, hint of what Bad Batch actually means.
Mhm.
So yeah, it's ironic you brought that up because I was thinking about that quite a bit actually in this.
Yeah. In case we lost anyone there, I did do it rather non sequitur. Karen Travis during the Legends era wrote the Republic Commando books that featured it was a tie into a video game for one
Mhm.
thing, but then it did kind of bring up this idea of how the clones developed a culture that was based off of Mandalorian culture, and then there was a lot of difficulties between these clones and some of the mercenaries that trained them. Some violence that resulted as that, and so I felt like maybe there was a little bit of an influence because Brick is very hard on
Mhm.
Domino Squad here to the point where he pulls Cut Up aside and gets a little physical with them, and just challenges him outright. As best I can tell, you're the reason why your squad is failing at this here, but he does get through to him in the way that
Mhm.
it's similar how Cal Scarata and others got through to the clones and Travis's work there. I have to admit, you remember those books a lot better than I do. I remember the
Oh,
broad strokes, but I haven't
love
read
those
them
books.
as thoroughly as you did, I suspect. But so getting back to this story, we've got Domino Squad, which is made up of Heavy, who is the heavy weapons specialist, Droid Bait, who gets his nickname because he's always getting shot by the droids. Echo, who we know from the Bad Batch, probably of this group we know the best at this point.
Right, right.
Cut Up, who is the jokester of the group, and then Fives, who we likely know the second best out of this group because he and Echo make it the furthest in their careers out of this squad here. But it starts off with things are not good. They are not a cohesive unit here, and it really does take encouragement from multiple sources, especially some that are ready to give up on them, to pull it together here. But what did you make of the squad?
Well, it's one of those things where we've seen so many different representations of clones up to this point. And I think in the featurette, Dave Filoni was talking about how, we're going back to Kamino. They don't have their individuality yet. They don't have different haircuts. They don't have their tattoos. They don't have these things, but yet they do. They are coming out of the mold, quote unquote, as even though they are genetically identical, or at least, like extremely similar, some of them have variations like blonde hair or whatever. I mean, this episode really does affirm that they're not identical and that they're all different in reactions and their mistakes and their ways of learning. And even like it hit me that the competition that exists between them is very similar to, what you might see even in athletics where, there was the one squad that came, "Oh, it's time to watch the dominoes fall." And, there's different ways of being brothers, and as opposed to, working together as this cohesive team, and they really did have to learn.
Mhm.
So it's one of those things where even though they're genetically templated the same, that there's always going to be those like life finds a way kind of moments.
Yeah. One of the things that occurred to me watching this is that, again, they're all clones of Jango Fett. We know that. But what was one of the things that they told Obi-Wan, or the Kaminoans told Obi-Wan who was there? It's like, they've been genetically modified to be less independent than the host. Well, what's Heavy's problem? Is he's way too
He's
independent,
too
right?
independent, right? Hmm.
Yeah, and so that's something they didn't manage to tamp down when they cloned him here. And then, it's just kind of like and that just got me thinking is like each one of these clones in this squad, I don't want to say it's a defective part of Django's personality, but they like have some part of his personality is a little bit amplified, which makes them not work as well as what the other squads are doing here. It's, you know, Django is disciplined, and that's kind of embodied in Echo. He's got, he's always repeating the orders, and he's insisting on the adherence to orders and this, that, and the other. Not that Django was taking orders, but he had discipline. And so, if he had a mission, he was going to stick to his mission. And like, just think about when he told Zam Wessel, it's like, you can't fail again. You got to get this right with the assassination attempt on Padme's life and the like. So, and then droid base just clumsy. So that's not really a Django characteristic, but anyway, that's one of the things that occurred to me in that regard. And then we've got their trainers. So we've got Brick and LS. So Brick is a Senatine and LS is an Arcona. They are of species that we got to see in the Mos Eisley Cantina. So brand new models that they created for this episode. If you want a better clarification, the Senatine, which Brick is the one that basically has the exterior brain. And Senatine is an anagram of Einstein.
I love that.
Yeah. And he's especially hard on the clones. And, they're both former bounty hunters that have been brought in to train them, which is a little weird to me because I get that they wanted to use Jango Fett as a template because, he's the best bounty hunter in the galaxy. They liked his genetic makeup and whatever, but just bringing in bounty hunters to do the training, it's you don't have like other Republic personnel to do this. It's just a unique idea, I suppose. What do you think about that?
Yeah, it is a little bizarre in a lot of ways because what is it that the Jedi are so like obsessed with bounty hunters or whatever?
Uh-huh.
But in LS is so different from Brick in that, Brick is so much more hard nosed and LS is like, let's just keep giving them a chance. He's very unbounty hunter-esque in that way, in a lot of ways. But it really also, hit me that why bounty hunters for training? Why
Yeah.
why not get someone that was in a military role instead?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I was like,
Yeah.
I'm just not sure about that. And is it because the thinking is that Jango Fett was a bounty hunter and they appreciated his skills. So who best to get that out of the clones than other bounty hunters?
Mhm.
I don't know.
Yeah.
It does. One of the things I've kind of come to appreciate while we've been doing so many of these Clone Wars conversations is that George Lucas imparted on Dave Filoni is like, it doesn't have to make 100% sense. It just has
Right.
to be cool, right?
Exactly.
And he wanted to say, continuity is for wimps, which is probably a discussion topic for another time.
Sure.
Here, one of the things that occurred to me about LLS is that I think he was really grateful for this opportunity. It's and to a lesser degree, Brick, where I think of Arsing, Bosk, Boba Fett later on, all these other bounty hunters that we get to see over time. It's like they're doing this because they have like a grudge against the galaxy.
Mhm.
And, this is a way of making money and they don't follow all of society's rules. But LLS seems to really savor this opportunity to educate these clones. He's rooting for them to
Mhm.
succeed. He really
Truly.
wants them to, where I can't see our Singh. I mean, we know she doesn't care. It would never take on a role like this
Right.
here. But
Right.
and the thing is they kind of set us up to not like Brick at the beginning of this because he really just does not like this group of clones. And he almost delights in the idea that they might fail. But by the end, they are both really likable characters.
Yeah, for sure. And it's interesting too that Shakti almost sides with Brick in a lot of ways because she says, the battles are very unpredictable and they do have
Mhm.
to adapt. And, even though at one point when Domino Squad is getting into their final test and Brick has kind of sabotaged them by taking away their grappling guns, Shakti's like, well, war's not fair. So let's see
Mhm.
how they do.
Yeah. Well, the other thing is that, there's this notion that if they fail, then these two have failed. And I think that really gets to Brick,
Mm,
which is that it's
mhm.
not just that you had a bad batch of clones, it's that you didn't train them appropriately. And then it occurs to him, it's like, well, why is it that this group isn't succeeding? And he singles out Cut Up, who's just not taking it seriously. And imparts on him, it's like, if your squad is going to succeed, you have to be part of that,
Hmm.
which is, which is kind of like the stereotypical drill sergeant we see in so many like army movies, right? It's this
Right.
guy that just gives them hell, but he really wants them to succeed, and so he's hard on them. He breaks them
Hmm.
down and then turns them and builds them back up into what they need to be in that
Hmm.
situation.
Yeah, and you mentioned, if the squad fails, then they fail, and I think it was LS that said that. He said that their success or failure is basically on us, but
Uh-huh.
he said it in a different way, but he LS, I think, approaches it more as a teacher standpoint, an educator standpoint. Like, if they fail, that means we failed to do our job. Like, we didn't teach them well. Whereas Brick's like, well, if they fail, then it's just a direct reflection on me
Right.
failing,
Right.
so his is a little more egotistical in nature, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, yeah. You brought up Shakti, and this is her first appearance in the Clone Wars. And you also made mention how in some aspects she's on, she sides with Brick, which is war's not predictable. So, just because we have this set up here and they may be missing their ascension guns, they have to overcome here. So that's some of the aspects that we get to see of her. But what do you think about her appearance overall in this episode?
Well, when she was meeting with, Lama Su, and Lama Su was just very stoic about the entire thing, which of course I'm assuming that that's just how they have to be because they can't be attached to clones at all. But Shakti was very appalled by the idea that, well, what are you're going to do? Just dispose of them? They're
Right.
people.
Uh-huh.
So, there's that aspect of that she feels that responsibility, that moral responsibility that you can't just dispose of them, but yet isn't that what they're bred for is to be, and I'm not saying that I agree with that, but you could make the argument that that's why they're doing it in the first place is so that they can have hundreds of thousands of clones that will fight and die for them. So by extension, that makes them disposable.
I think what you've just done is highlight the difference between the way the Kaminoans look at the clones, the
Mhm.
Jedi look at the clones, and the Republic frequently looks at the clones. This no one knew exactly where this army came from, who ordered it. We come to find out with Sifo Dyas here, but there was at this time there's a mystery on how that came to be, and we get to see in the very first episode of the Clone Wars how Yoda tells the clones to take off their helmets, and they're like, "Well, there's not much to see here. We all got the same face," but he points out how they are all individuals here, and this is what Shakti recognizes: is that they may have been bred for a specific purpose, but they are still living sentient beings
Mhm.
here. We can't just we just can't say, "Oh, didn't work out in this situation." We have to give an opportunity. Now we say that, and we have a lot of examples between episode 1 of the Clone Wars and here, where the loss of a clone seems to be acceptable when a Jedi survives. But we also have plenty of examples where the Jedi mourn the loss of a clone. So I'm just thinking of the last story arc when that one clone goes to Mace's quarters on the Endurance and gets blown up, and Mace is bothered by that. So
Mhm.
I think the Jedi overall have a broader view on this and see the clones as individuals where maybe the rest of the galaxy, including the Kaminoans, don't. And that's very much highlighted in the Bad Batch, which comes
Yes.
out many many
Yes.
years after
And,
this.
I also wanna ask you too, as far as the way that this graduation and assessment was so highlighted in this particular episode
Hmm.
that, why I'm not exactly sure how to phrase this, but, again, with the way that the role of the clones are in the whole scheme of things, it's just very interesting to me that they would take the time to have a graduation ceremony to promote these clones and even give them medals to prove that they've done this. When if they're tools as to a means to an end, that seems like an interesting investment. What do you think?
Yeah, but it's a minimal graduation ceremony, right? I mean, you have
Sure.
the two bounty hunters there that trained them, and then Shakti, and it's not like there's it's not like graduating from college where there is a commencement speaker and there's other honored guests and all kinds of faculty from all over the university showing up there, and there's no loved ones. I mean, for these clones, they get their trooper armor and then they're sent on their way in this situation. But I also would think that despite the fact that the Kaminoans have bred out to some degree the independence of the clones, so that they're more obedient to follow orders and stuff like that, these are still people. They still need motivation. You still want to build them up that you are now part of the finest fighting force in the galaxy in this situation. And that's not something that you can just breed into them. You have to
Mhm.
teach them and you have to
Mhm.
educate them. And I think that's part of what this is all about, which is, you know, we've trained you to be these soldiers. Now you're going to go out, you were cadets. Congratulations, you've made it. You now get to be soldiers and go do what you were intended to do. And, that type of recognition, as slight as it might be, goes a long way.
Mhm. So it adds to the intrinsic motivation for them to perform, is what
That's
you're
fine. My
saying.
take.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yep, that makes sense.
One of the things that occurred to me during this episode is, we get to see this training facility, and it's a pit that has this grid markings all over it, and they put battle droids in it, and then the terrain can be altered and stuff like that. I was just thinking about how much the design of this like shows up later in Star Wars. When we get into later seasons and Obi-Wan goes undercover and they go into that cube where they're
Yes.
testing the bounty hunters. There's a very similar type of apparatus there. And then in Rebels, when Ezra is undercover as a cadet, training to be a stormtrooper someday, they very much
Mhm.
have like the next evolution of this type of a pit. But it was weird because when I watched that episode of Rebels, it never occurred to me that this might have been the basis for that. But I feel very much like it is.
Oh, I agree. Yeah, and I mean, the Bad Batch kinda does the same thing too. I mean, they show in their early training, correct? If I remember.
Well, they come back and they do, like, they when they came back to Kamino, they end up on that training floor.
That's what it is. Okay, okay.
Right. Yeah. And so, it's a live fire at that point. And, you know,
Mhm.
they are estranged from Crosshair at the time, but he ends up fighting with them to get through it, only to get
That's
left
right.
behind. But
Yes, yes, thank you.
so it's so easy to go along in this episode. But we also meet Clone 99, and you referenced this earlier. He's a defective clone. And that's a harsh thing to say, but compared to the others, he's got, a bent back and he's not in shape to fight, but he is basically in charge of maintenance and custodial type work on and Kamino there where they train the clones. But he's kind of the conscience, especially for Heavy there. He talks about how much he still honors his brothers, and he gets through to Heavy by telling him, it's like, you're going to go AWOL, and if you do that, then your squad's going to fail. And and Heavy kind of questions this. 99 says, well, how can I fail? I was never given a chance on this. You've got a chance. And it really gets through to Heavy in that regard. And then, of course, we know, 99 comes to represent any type of, again, using the word effective, a variation from the template there, and in the Bad Batch, Clone Force 99 has defects that are considered beneficial there. Hunter senses, Crosshair's ability to aim, Tech's abilities, Wrecker is huge and super strong, and the like there. But what'd you think of 99 in this episode?
Well, he's definitely, as you said, the conscience of the clones in a lot of ways. He's sort of this moral compass for them. And he's so grateful just to be able to do what he does. And he sees Heavy and he sees Domino Squad and all of his brothers as being having such wonderful privilege to be able to do these things. And
Mhm.
so he's very inspirational in that way, and he has actually more emotional intelligence and empathy than a lot of the other clones do. So as quote unquote defective as he is physically, And despite those physical limitations, he is very, he kind of flips the narrative, I guess you could say, in that way, that it makes you think that not everybody is as they, don't judge a book by their cover kind of thing. And he
Mhm.
just chooses to serve in whatever way he can. And it was so sweet when Heavy gave him his badge. I just thought that was awesome.
Yeah, yeah, it's like, "I need to hold on to this, and so when it come back and give it back to me," that was, that was pretty cool. It was
Yeah.
very, very touching. It's one of these things I can't decide if, they did such a good job with this episode. They do so much with the 24 minutes or so that it is, if you take out all the commercial breaks and stuff. But I really would have loved, like, 3 or 4 episodes of this.
Mhm.
Just getting an opportunity to expand a bit more on, having this first episode that like ends with them failing the test, and then them building themselves back up into, and then that third episode where they finally get it, just to give us more moments where, Brick is having a change of heart and getting through to them, because he really did not care, or he came off that way. But by the end, he was challenged on this, which is, "Oh, we thought you were better than this. You can't get through to these guys." And then suddenly it's like, "Oh, I guess he's," and the thing is, he didn't want anybody to know, right? It was just this kind
Right.
of, he was just trying to play it off, but nobody, everyone saw through him in that regard, including the audience there. But I don't know. I don't think, like I said, when the first time I watched this, I would have necessarily wanted multiple episodes, but with all this time, it's like, I think I really would have enjoyed, a whole arc. Just sit there on Camino watching Domino train and finally pass that test.
Oh, yeah. Me too. And, one of the things that as we revisit this, and I've kind of always felt this anyways, is that, clones are not just identical, as we know, they all have specific variations, but there is definitely a almost like a continuum, of clone personalities. And, you've got clone 99 on one end, and then you've got, some of your more, strict kind of templated sorts of clones, but they're not all as cookie cutter as you may think. And I dig that. I just think that that's such a cool thing to explore from, a psychological aspect, and I just can't get enough of it. I could go on and on.
Yeah, yeah. I did like it when they had the ARC troopers show up, and this is what the clones are all aspiring to be. They
Mhm.
go from here to troopers, and then the best of the best get to be ARC troopers there, and then it's a ARC trooper Commander Colt that sees is overseeing the final test. So Bravo Squadron shows up and goes first, and they just knock it out of the park. And then I almost felt like this reference was a little too nailing, hitting the nail right on the head. But he tells them to run, version THX variable
Yes.
1138 or whatever. It's like, yes,
1138.
yes, THX 1138. We get it here. Um, yeah, it's like Easter eggs are fun, but this, and I don't want to say it took me out of the episode, but it's just kind of like, it is a massive wink at the audience
It
at this
is.
point. It's, Star Wars fans know that reference. But anyway, it was just kind of I guess the difference I can explain like this is, like, when there's an item in the background or something, like, you think of Luthen Rail's store and all the
Uh-huh.
artifacts in there, and like, oh, there's Padme's headdress. Oh,
Uh-huh.
there's the Star Killer armor. Oh, there, all those things. It's like, okay, that's great. But they didn't, like, have to go out of their way to point that out. But it almost like him saying THX 1138. It's just like, okay, that's it was just like
Uh,
super direct, the way they did that. I don't know why that just stood out to me so much this time, but it did.
it reminds me of when Captain America was so desperate to be like, "I understood that reference," kind of
Yeah,
thing,
that's
which
a
is
good way
so
of putting it.
obvious. Yeah.
Yeah. The other thing, in here, it's just kind of a casual thing, but you were talking earlier about how when Shakti is having that conversation with Lama Su, and he makes a reference to how they've been stretching Django's DNA as far as possible.
Mhm.
He's the donor, but he's gone, and they have a limited supply of his DNA, and so the alternative is they can keep stretching this as much as they can, or they can find another donor. And I don't know why, but that idea just really grabbed my imagination and fascinated me this time. And like,
Yes.
who else would they possibly have gone with? I mean,
I
there's
am with you.
trillions of people in the galaxy to choose from, but who in this situation here? I mean, you have any ideas of what you would have considered?
Well, like you, I was completely enamored with this. And I was thinking to myself, I wonder if, first of all, obviously they said supposedly Sifo-Dyas found Jango Fett.
Hmm.
However, how did they come about deciding that this is the guy? And you would think to yourself that if they put this out there that said, hey, we need a new clone template, that they would have all of these clone or these bounty hunters trying to be cloned, or that they would get people that would come in because obviously they were paid. Django was probably paid a very hefty sum, and he got his own clone out of it, and who knows what else kind of arrangements that were made for him. But yeah, I mean, it's just it is very interesting to think who would want to step up to say, yeah, I would love to be the template for this, and how would they choose that person?
Right, because I'm thinking like Jango Fett. What's attractive about him is that he's got all the skills, he's got a strong build, he's got the physique. He's someone. Even with the personality that we got to see in Attack of the Clones, he was not quite as evil as say Cad Bane. Because
Mhm.
you could extend the search for a new donor to be your template. That doesn't have to be a bounty hunter, but if that's the pull you're pulling from, who's the other best bounty hunter in the galaxy? It's Cad Bane. But would you want him as your template? I don't think so, because how much alteration are you doing to subvert all those instincts he has?
Mhm.
Now, we've since had the benefit of watching Tales of the Bounty Hunters, or the Underworld, where we saw the circumstances that made him who he is, but he's
Right.
susceptible to that. And as good a fighter as he is, he doesn't strike me as someone who is naturally as has the natural physique that Django had that would make him an ideal soldier either.
Mhm.
So, that's just so I don't know. It's just like, it seems like in a galaxy of trillions, it shouldn't be too hard to find somebody, but maybe it is finding
Yeah,
difficult to find that ideal donor that is someone that has the genetic makeup that you can work with to make a legion of clones out
sure, sure. Could you imagine having a clone army of Hondo Onakas?
of. You'd never get anything done.
Right.
They'd all
It'd
be
be entertaining though.
yeah, they'd be constantly getting caught up in the peculiarities of whatever battle that they were in. But oof, that'd be something.
Yes.
All right. Well,
Fun is enough.
we're going a little longer than we usually do for these episodes. But before we wrap it up, is there anything else you want to make sure we touch on before we put the bow on this one?
Oh, I think we've pretty much had or hit everything on the head here with these. And again, it's just so great to revisit. And I'm always about talking clones. So very, very glad we got to do this one.
Yeah, me too. Me too. All right, then. Well, we'll go ahead and start wrapping this up. Thank you all for joining us for this episode of Podcast Stardust and our discussion of this episode of the Clone Wars as we get through our rewatch. Can't believe we're already in season 3. Just feels like we started this yesterday, but here we are.
Hmm.
But we hope you've enjoyed the discussion. And if you want to make sure you're getting all of our rewatch discussions, then hit that subscribe button on your podcast, your choice, if you haven't done so already. We're going to take a little bit of a break from the Clone Wars as we work our way through Lego Rebuild the Galaxy Pieces of the Past, that miniseries that came out. It'll only be for a few weeks, and then we'll be right back into the Clone Wars. But we will be getting back to it. And if you could do us a great favor and review the podcast on your podcast of choice, that does help out the algorithm and get the show in front of more people. And then if you want to find more episodes of the show, one of the best places you can do is go to our home at retrozap.com, where you can find the entire catalog of previous 941 episodes. They're all there. And we covered a lot of things. So make sure you
Hmm.
go check that out. Jay, why don't you go ahead and give everyone our social media contacts one more time, as well as the other places they can find us on the internet.
You got it, Dennis. We are on Facebook and Instagram, conveniently at Podcast Stardust. And we are literally everywhere. So every streaming platform you can possibly imagine, including even Spotify, Audible, as well as YouTube and YouTube Music. So head over to all of those, like, subscribe, share those out. Please let us know what you thought of this show or any others. And we also have all of our Pinterest boards that have tons of ideas for everything Star Wars. And please, if you are so inclined, hit that link in our show notes to go pick up a product from TeePublic with one of 7 different Podcast Stardust logo designs available. And we sure do appreciate that. And every purchase does help to support the show.
All right, upcoming on the show, we've got our next installment of our Revenge of the Sith series this Wednesday. We got a great guest for that, so make sure you join us. And then on Friday, we are wrapping up the week with another edition of Star Wars News. So thanks for listening to episode 942 of Podcast Stardust, everyone. Have a great week. And until next time, may the Force be with you.